Welcome to Human Potential at Work, the show where we explore social impact, inclusion, and empowerment of everyone, including persons with disabilities. Your host is Deborah Rue, CEO of Rue Global Impact and co-founder and chairwoman of Billion Strong, an identity and empowerment organization designed to bring billions of voices of persons with disabilities together. To join the global community and to donate to the cause, visit billion-strong.org. That's billion-strong.org. And now, on to the episode.
Hello, everyone. My name is Deborah Rue, and this is Human Potential at Work. Today's guest, I actually thought I'd already had her on the program because her work impresses me so much, but I was wrong. She was actually on our other show, Access Chat. But Elaine Katz is joining us, and she is from the Kessler Foundation. And I love the work that they're doing, but they're doing more than just being funders. They actually work with other funders to really help support the community of people with disabilities. And Elaine is in the States, but she's also a global traveler looking around at these issues from a global perspective. And she's really talented. I've always been very impressed with her. Sorry, Elaine, but I really have been, because we need what you're doing in this conversation as well. So Elaine, tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got into the field to want to support people with disabilities. And then tell us more about Kessler Foundation and why Kessler Foundation cares about having true social impact, especially for the community of people with disabilities.
Deborah, thank you for having me. It's a hard introduction to follow, but it's good to be here. My original background is actually in speech pathology, so I've always worked with people with disabilities for many years, but I only spent a little bit of time in that, and most of my life I spent in the nonprofit realm. And then I found myself at Kessler Foundation. What Kessler Foundation does is that we change the lives of people with disabilities through rehabilitation research, as well as funding employment initiatives for people with disabilities. And our research seeks to improve cognition and mobility for people with various disabilities, such as spinal cord injury, traumatic brain injury, stroke, those types of things, as well as we also look to improve function and daily function and independence to help people regain their lives back in the community. As far as our Center for Grant Making, which I head, over the past 13 years, we've supported different organizations, both in New Jersey and nationally. We don't fund, unfortunately, internationally at this point, but we have contributed $49 million to increasing the participation rates of people with disabilities throughout the country. And that's one of our greatest accomplishments, I think, in that adding voice to the field. We're one of the first funders to fund in the space. Now there's a number of different funders, and especially during COVID, there's been a lot of attention paid to the employment of people with disabilities. And we're happy to contribute to the field that way.
Wow, it's so amazing that it's 49 million. I didn't realize it was that much. But I also want to say, not only are they contributing in that way, they're leading in other ways. And that I know that, and Elaine actually explained this to me, but a lot of times somebody that's going to fund, a lot of times the funders will get together and fund a project. And actually, once again, Elaine has educated me on some of this. And so they've really shown leadership in encouraging other funders to join the conversation and want to join them and others to really support us. As she said, they were one of the first. Now there are others, but I like how they work with other funders to explain to them and teach them why this is a really good community to support. And I also like the cleverness of how they're supporting things. And of course, people are always pitching them and stuff, and you have to follow the way they do things. But I know that y'all have done some things. You've tied things into transportation and technology. So they're focusing on what's happening in the world and allowing our community to stay and be as independent as possible. And I just don't see that leadership happening from a lot of other funders. And that's another reason why I've learned personally a lot from Elaine. I never had a nonprofit. Now we do. We also have billionstrong.org. And actually, Elaine has graciously become one of my advisors because I don't know so much. I don't know what I'm doing about stuff. But the role that she plays and that Kessler Foundation plays is really important. $49 million is not a small thing, but it's so much more than that. And Elaine, you mentioned that you told me a couple of things y'all did during COVID-19, and I was already so impressed with what y'all do, but that really continued to warm my heart. So will you talk about a little bit of ways that you helped during the COVID-19 pandemic? I know we're still in it, but
Sure, we're still in it. And one of the things we were doing was we were funding innovative projects nationally as well as in New Jersey. And what we decided to do was there was such a need in New Jersey. We were hearing about nonprofit organizations that were not serve people with disabilities that were not being included in some of the discussions. For example, PPE was being made available to hospitals and nursing homes, but not to group homes that serve people with disabilities or to the nonprofits themselves that were continuing to serve people. So what our Board of Trustees did is step up and provide almost $1 million worth of funding to make available to local organizations to apply. And it was really in anything. It didn't have to be around employment. And we turned around about 40 grants in 30 days. So that was pretty amazing in itself. We streamlined our approval process, so it didn't have to go to the full board of directors. It mainly went to the board president and a small internal committee. And we funded technology. And the amazing thing about technology, it wasn't just for people with disabilities, and there's a large technological divide, but there's this technological divide between nonprofits, staff that serve people with disabilities, and other nonprofits. And it was to the staff themselves that we gave technology to as well, plus providing PPE. We did a lot of food, clothing, shelter needs. So it was pretty extraordinary that we're able to step up so quickly and help both our grantees and the community at large in New Jersey.
yeah, and I'm going to ask you a question that, by the way, you already answered. Why do you think it's so important for funders like Kessler Foundation to be in these conversations? You, of course, just gave us some amazing answers, but it is something that often we don't hear a lot of conversations about funders like Kessler Foundation that are so entrenched in making sure that people with disabilities are meaningfully included.
What's really important, and we're particularly looking at employment, but if you look at housing, employment, and health, which are the big areas for people with disabilities, they all kind of work together. So even though we've had employment projects, if you don't look at access to health, access to transportation, to those what we call wraparound services, then it's very difficult to gain employment, to maintain employment, and to even be promoted in employment. So we especially saw that during COVID. There were many actually individuals with disabilities who were not only let go, first hired, first fired, last hired, first fired, but there were a lot of individuals who actually were essential workers who were individuals with disabilities. And what we've seen through our national trends in disability employment, which is a monthly report that we produce in the U.S. based on Bureau of Labor Statistics with the University of New Hampshire, that people with disabilities stayed engaged throughout last year when we saw the most influence of COVID on our daily lives and the lockdown as well. And in fact, last month in June, the numbers have increased. So the participation rates of people with disabilities have increased, and also the employment to total population rates have increased in the U.S. So we're seeing as people get back to work, that includes people with disabilities. And it could be the influence of telecommuting, but I think more importantly, it's just that people with disabilities have stayed engaged. And employers now are looking for employees who have a good track history and are able to do the job.
Yeah, so well said. And we actually, at Billion Strong, we're going to create an award. I bet I know who's going to win it. Sorry. We're going to create an award for foundations that are supporting us because, as Elaine said, more foundations have stepped in to support us, I believe, through a lot of the work they've done. I think as a community, we really need to know what Kessler Foundations and others are doing and how they are actually adding so much value to our lives and our community lives. So I know I'm embarrassing you, Elaine. I'm sorry about that, but I just am very grateful for the work that you and the Kessler Foundation are doing because it's life-changing work. It is affecting individuals and families like mine. And I just feel so grateful because I don't see enough of that leadership. And so I just am so thankful that for so long y'all have been willing to do this. But Elaine, why does Kessler care about these issues?
Our history was really as a rehab hospital. So a rehabilitation hospital that was founded in the late 1940s by Dr. Henry H. Kessler, who was a neurosurgeon. And he really traveled around the world. He was in 2 different world wars working with people who were injured. That's how he developed his specialty. And he got together with a group of families and decided to serve individuals with disabilities and get them back to work and into the community. And he was very instrumental actually in setting up vocational rehabilitation in the state of New Jersey. He won lots of awards, traveled the world, met the Pope, really was world renowned in that. And he had what they called a hospital on the hill, which was serving people with disabilities and rehabilitation. And through the years, that hospital grew. And like most entities these days, it was not-for-profit that was sold to a for-profit and became a for-profit. And the proceeds of the sale came in to provide the corpus for Kessler Foundation. Along the way, we also incorporated their research arm. So research has been in our DNA for a very long time. And what's the purpose of research? The purpose of research is to get people back to their lives. And what's an important part of identity is working. What do you do? What do people ask you the first thing when they meet you, besides what is your name, is what do you do? For most people with disabilities, there's not an answer to that question. For young children, there hasn't been an expectation of what do you want to be when you grow up. Employment is a way to sustain yourself, to develop your interest, to be part of the community, but more importantly, to be independent. In whatever way you can be independent, I think we see that as an important part of community integration and of life, and that's how we've always had an interest in disability.
That is such a cool story. I think you've told me a little bit of that story, but not like you explained it just now. That is really a very cool history and legacy. And it's interesting how that legacy shifted and changed to really be more valuable to society. I want to ask you a question about other funders, but before I do that, do you mind just telling the audience a little bit more about your job reports? Because that's something I know my company finds extremely valuable. I know a lot of people watch it. It's been going on for years. And it's just such a blessing to get this data. I was really exploring it during COVID-19 because I was so fearful for our community. But I also want to say that, as Elaine said, this is what they know how to do. Not everybody knows how to do research in a way that you can be very sure that you're getting the data that is correct. But we need the research. The corporations need the research, and it has to be grounded research that you can show how you got the numbers. I know a lot of people throw around in the States at this term, people with disabilities have $220 billion of discretionary income. And that has been thrown around since I started the field 20 plus years ago. And I could never find where to ground that data. And by the way, corporations looking at research, they're digging in to see where you got it from. That's why when you do research, you need to work with somebody that's really knows what they're doing and has been doing it for a long time, like the Kessler Foundation. So I was wondering if you would tell us more about the jobs, but also about the work you're doing with research and why it's so important. And then we can talk about the funders.
Okay, so we will have 2 sides of our research. We have our rehabilitation research, which is really improving function. And what I get involved in my team is working in the area of employment research. And the employment research we've carved out a monthly report called the National Trends in Disability Employment. And now since COVID, we have a special report that also comes out monthly, particularly month to month on COVID. So our research is really extrapolating numbers, particularly for people with disabilities, that come out of the 6 questions that are asked nationally through the Bureau of Labor Statistics every month to the population. And those disability questions give us some information about people with disabilities and how they're working. From that, we've able to produce a monthly webinar if people are interested that have speakers such as Deborah's been on it and others. The other research we've really dug into in us is doing some surveys. So we started in 2015 with just a survey on employment for people with disabilities. And we found through that survey, working with the University of New Hampshire, is that people with disabilities are striving to work. They really do want to work. And they're trying in different ways, whether it's training, whether it's learning, whether it's pursuing a job, whether it's pursuing improvement in their job by meeting promotion. They really do want to work. So that dispelled that kind of a fallacy. Next, we really wanted to know about on-the-job information. So we looked at our 2017 survey that was with supervisors. We polled about 4,000 supervisors that actually supervised people with disabilities and others. And the question was, okay, why are they supervising people with disabilities? How do they come to the company? What are they doing that makes people successful or themselves successful in supervisors? And what we found in that is that companies that hire a lot of people with disabilities, it really comes from the top. That the supervisors were looking to senior leadership in order to hire people with disabilities. But then when it came to the performance, how do they do, senior leadership stepped out of that picture. And it was really the manager, because it's the manager and their team that is being rated on how, especially for these for-profit companies, how things are going. So it's their own team. So they're invested in their employees with and without disabilities to make sure that things go well. And what else came out of that survey that was really interesting is that we found that when corporations used a nonprofit, a local nonprofit or a consultant to help them get advice on how to hire people with disabilities, how to onboard them, help with their processes, that always worked over 90% of the time, which was great. And then we came to our most recent survey in 2020, which was looking at the experiences of college students with disabilities. And we always hear that there are many students with disabilities who go on to higher education, but then they can't find jobs. And what we found is that the college experiences of young adults with disabilities were really the same as students without disabilities. They engaged in the same amount of internships, job prep in college, went to the Office of Disability Services, used all the services they can on campus. The real difference we saw that in some ways is troubling is that there's not as many STEM majors. So those science, technology majors were not, engineering were not as prevalent among those students without disabilities. And if you see where the U.S. is headed in the world, it's really involved with technology. So that's, in a long-winded way, the research that we've been engaged in over the past few years.
Yeah, no, it was a really powerful answer. And I like that you're focused on funding innovative programs. And it's so easy to say words like innovative, but they really are focused on innovative programs. And so you mentioned the technology, and I just wanted to point that out. That's another reason why I just have always been such a fan of the work that you do. And I don't know if you want to comment on that, why y'all care about really looking at it. And keep in mind, they've been around a long time. They're very sophisticated. They know what they're doing. And so when they say innovative, they're not just throwing that word there. It's actually really innovative. I know I was talking to you one time about a transportation project that I think after it was all said and done, it couldn't come together, but it was so interesting to me. You were going to fund something that was going to take the vans and stuff that rehabilitation or different providers use during the week and sits there on the weekends, and see if there was some opportunity to provide better transportation to the community. So just clever things like that. So do you mind just giving us a few examples of innovative things y'all have done? And if you want to comment on that thing, I remember.
Sure. So when we look at innovation, we're not talking about something that's being invented, for example. What we think of innovation is taking what's currently out there and twisting it, turning it, and having different outcomes. So what you mentioned, Deborah, was a project we had where we know vans sit around during the day. Sometimes they take people to work in the beginning of the day and the end of the day. And we're hoping to use something like Uber or Lyft and use those same drivers and have them drive for those services during the day to take people to medical appointments. That's actually still being explored again, and it was right before COVID. But at the time, there were issues with American insurance companies and the community, which prevented, and those other companies prevented large corporate accounts for insurance, which is what these drivers were covered on, because they weren't driving individually, they'd be driving on behalf of an organization. But when we're looking at technology, for example, and Deborah knows this very well, we started looking at artificial intelligence. So what we try to do is look at the scope of what's going on nationally for individuals with disabilities and just in general in the fields, and seeing how that may play into and picking that niche, because our funding is limited. We are a small funder. Finding that niche of projects that we would like to fund. And we started looking at artificial intelligence because we know there's growth in that when it comes to employment for individuals with disabilities. And only recently, we actually were asked by Microsoft to join and do some co-funding on some projects that they have in artificial intelligence. They have an RFP out every year. It's out right now that looks, and it used to be called Funding for Good, and has funded some projects and job boards using AI and the expertise of Microsoft engineers to help launch these projects. So we are starting just an informal collaboration with them to move forward and look at some of these projects that we, because we're small, we wouldn't really have gotten and the expertise to evaluate them as far as projects too with Microsoft. So that's very exciting. That just happened recently over the past month or so. One of the other projects we're looking at too is that it's very important to work with human resources and have them skill up to be able to work with people with disabilities. And we have established a relationship with the Society of Human Resource Managers, which actually is international. And they will be developing a certification that will be on their website. It will be free. It will be open to members and non-members to get certified in and learn about how to hire and how to onboard people with disabilities.
Yeah, I've seen SHRM, Society of Human Resource Management, show a lot of leadership in our film. They're really trying to make sure that this part of the diversity inclusion is really included. So it's exciting to see brands like Microsoft partnering with Kessler Foundation and SHRM. That right there tells you, I'm not just telling you they're amazing, they really are amazing. But tell me why it's important to Kessler to collaborate and teach other funders. And once again, funders can be corporations, foundations. Corporations have foundations too, and some of them are. I know there's the Ford Foundation and Mitsubishi Foundation. So we see corporate foundations in these conversations. But I will tell you, I know that Kessler Foundation, a lot of times with Elaine's leadership, has really been encouraging other funders to join these conversations. Why, Elaine? Why does it matter? You explained a little bit about how partnering with Microsoft gives you a bigger reach, but I was wondering if you would dig into that a little more too.
I think reach is really important. It does give us a bigger reach. But also, I think what's important is that everybody has disabilities. We know in the States that 1 in 4 people probably have disabilities. We know there's 56 or 60, nobody really knows the number, but it's huge. Millions of people in the US and the world have disabilities. It touches everybody's life, and everybody knows somebody with a disability, whether it's an evident disability or non-evident disability, which means you can see it or you can't see it. So we know people working at organizations have disabilities. One of the groups that I joined, became on the steering committee a number of years ago, was something called Workforce Matters. And that is a group that focuses on employment grant making, so it's all funders, but not necessarily disability. So it's important for funders to realize that when they fund people, they need to think about disability, because outcomes of projects may be affected by especially those that have these non-evident disabilities. So for example, if you're in a project and your outcomes is people keep going in and out of jobs, is it just because they can't hold a job? Yes, maybe, but maybe they can't hold a job because there's a disability interfering with it, or there's some language learning that's a problem, or there's some attention issues. So I think for funders to be mindful of these, I've heard a lot of pushback that yes, we don't fund disability particularly, but you are funding disability, and I think it's important. And I will say, I think some of these funders that I'm now working with are thinking about disability, just like it's taken a lot of time to think about diversity and to include disability in that diversity discussion. they need to think about their grant making when they're talking about diversity. It does include disability. So I think that's why it's really important to us. And I think part of our superpower, if you will, is convening. So we are able to have a voice and convene, even though we may not be the biggest funder out there. But I think the influence of funders, for example, you mentioned Ford Foundation now has a very large initiative focused on disability, where a number of years ago they probably wouldn't have even thought about it. So I think it is coming to the forefront. It is on people's minds. And again, especially with COVID, because more and more people are being touched by COVID with long-lasting health symptoms, and that's going to be creating a whole nother issue when it comes to employment and benefits.
Yeah, it's a really good point. And also, I was very fascinated and interested that during COVID-19 in the States, more Americans started coming out and identifying that they had disabilities than ever before. And so I remember, I've mentioned this on the show before, but I was talking to a colleague in the United Kingdom, and he said a CEO of a very large technology company had come to him and said, well, can you test me for dyslexia? I think it would be cool to be neurodiverse. And I thought, oh, good, because it is cool to have a disability. I have an invisible disability that probably isn't that invisible. I think anybody that's ever met me does know I have ADHD, even though I got diagnosed in my 50s. Made a lot of more sense. It was like, oh, and it's my superpower, as they say. But really being able to be authentic with our entire lived experiences is something I think a lot of us have learned during COVID-19. Sometimes when you're at home, a dog might bark. You might be holding two babies at the same time. My husband has dementia. Sometimes he'll just wander into the room and say, hello. So you're on air, right? No. So people have families and they have other things besides work. And so I think the work-life balance is another thing that we really started to understand during COVID-19. But Elaine, what should we do to get more funders engaged in these conversations here in the States, but also internationally? Y'all are leading. You talk about your small funder. Once again, $49 million seems like a lot of money to me, and I know this over a period of time, but it's not just about the money that they're funding, the programs they're funding. It's the leadership they're showing, encouraging other funders to really step into these conversations, corporations to really show us what they're doing. I just am such a fan of what Elaine.
Well, I would say, Deborah, to your question, it's important to take some risks. So if you're traditionally funding in one area, it's nice to take a little bit of risk in another area. I would say part of our innovation is that we will fund projects that don't have a proven track record. So the way some other funders can get involved is, even if you take one or two projects, fund something that may be in the disability area that's not proven, see how it works, learn from it, see it as a pilot. Those are ways that foundations can take baby steps into working with the disability population. Besides the fact of recognizing in your own backyard, so to speak, and there are a lot of foundations that have 300, 400, 500 people, as well as foundations that have 5, 6 people, that there are people in that sphere of universe that have disabilities, and being cognizant of it is really important. Talking about it, again, making sure everybody throughout the world is really looking at diverse populations now, that when you look for that diversity in your grant making, which means you're funding different types of people, different types of projects, that disability is included in that.
Yeah, said. Elaine, what are some of the common misconceptions that people think about foundations like the Kessler Foundation?
Common misperceptions.
Yeah.
I think maybe that we're not on the ground. We don't understand where people are coming from. And I would say that there are a lot of foundation officers and foundations like myself that have lived experience in one way or another with disabilities. We do understand the fields. We try to talk to the people doing the work as much as possible, attend meetings with them, get our ideas from the field. We've just recently started funding projects that we may think may move the field, but like most funders, we look to a request for proposal from the fields, hoping that good ideas will be bubbling up. So I think there's this misperception that we're not connected to the work we do, but we're, at least for us especially, we are very connected to the work and the community that we serve, and always try to honor and respect the people we work with.
And speak of being connected, you actually have also employed a lot of people with disabilities. So they're not just talking, they're actually doing the walk. They are walking the walk. So do you mind just telling us a little bit about that?
So we do hire a lot of people with disabilities. We have people in leadership positions. Our director of our spinal cord research has a disability. He was injured, actually. He's an MD. He was injured when he was very young in college, in medical school, and went on to finish, and has had a very responsible position here. Throughout the years, we've had an employee in communications who's been on a ventilator. So we do have a lot of, and then again, we have a lot of employees that have non-evident disabilities that work with us. When people with disabilities are in your mix, it adds to a very rich work environment. It adds to a very rich problem-solving environment. I think employers saw that during COVID, that when you don't see the wheelchair and you can see somebody through Zoom, you forget that they may have a disability, and they become a more, in some cases, if there's a resistance to hiring people with disabilities, they're seen as a more equal part of the team. And at the same time, they may feel more comfortable speaking up and not be as, look at themselves as somebody who is not as valued as other people. A lot of times we've seen that it's the person themselves with the disability who may have some self-perception and some issues with being on a team with being the only one on a team of able-bodied people. But I think a lot of work environments now have really changed during COVID to be much more inclusive and look at the diversity and richness that people in different environments, where they ever may be, bring to that workplace.
I agree. And you're humanizing. It's humanizing the situation. Elaine, I know I've kept you longer than I had said, but I want to ask you two more questions. And this is an odd question I'm going to ask, but what can our international community, I know that we have over 200,000 audience members, what can we do to support the work that Kessler Foundation and other funders are doing? Because I would assume there are things that we could do to help.
Yeah, I think one of the issues that we've seen is sometimes people don't know about the work. So, what some of the projects that we have could be replicated in other countries, other places. That's true of many other foundations and many other projects. So I think visit us on social media, visit others on social media, push out. We're always pushing out our work. KesslerFoundation.org or @KesslerFDN is our Twitter handle. So I think that's the best way to push out the information. And if you're curious, we're happy to link you to, we do have our researchers, Deborah, actually do throughout the world. We have a lot of research collaborations in China, in Europe, all different places. That's a whole nother discussion, a whole different guest. For the grant making side and our employment projects, we'd be happy to share whatever we do.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you to give the website and stuff, which you already did, but I know a lot of corporate representatives listen to the show, and I would highly recommend that you get in contact with Elaine and talk to her about ways that you can work with them, like the project she mentioned that's happening with Microsoft. I know that Heather Dowdy was one of the speakers at the AI conference that you had, where you're really trying to educate the professionals in our industry as well. I just really am grateful. I can't believe I haven't had you on the show. I'm just shocked, but we will definitely bring her back, because we definitely want to hear constantly what she's doing, because I just think you are changing the world, and I really am grateful for that. So Elaine, just one more time, would you tell the audience what your URL is, what your website is, social media? I know you're on LinkedIn. I definitely recommend following Elaine Katz on LinkedIn, but let the audience know those URLs.
Sure, we're happy to always have people visit us, Kessler Foundation, .org. Our Twitter handle is @KesslerFDN, short for foundation. Please visit us or like us or follow us, whatever you want to do.
Yes, and there's a lot of great information on their website, too, about the projects they have funded. So thank you, Elaine, for the work you're doing. Thank you to the Kessler Foundation, to your board of directors, because you are definitely making a difference for our 1.3 billion community members. So we appreciate
it. Thank you, Deborah.
Thank you. And I will definitely have her come back on, everyone. So bye.
You've been listening to Human Potential at Work. To learn more about RU Global Impact, visit ruglobal.com. And to learn more about Billion Strong, an identity and empowerment organization designed to bring the billions of voices of persons with disabilities together, you can join the global community and donate at billion-strong.org. That's billion-strong.org.